Supporters of freedom and natural rights just got good news in the form of a federal appeals court panel ruling that acknowledges and affirms the right to self-defense for people aged 18 through 20. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. You know, despite the fact that such a right should be obvious to anyone who bothers thinking about the nature of self-defense, this is a big victory. It hints at just how precarious all rights are at the hands of voracious political predators, and it contains a key flaw that helps us learn about a prior major Supreme Court error. The case, entitled Reese et al. V. ATF, stems from the federal so-called ban on handgun sales to 18 to 20-year-olds. One can put the word ban in quotes because, of course, the fearmongers in government who tell us that they're stopping criminals from getting guns, well, they overlook the fact that criminally minded people will get their firearms in the black market. Of course. Jacob Sullum reports for Reason about this case. Quote, "The federal ban on handgun sales to adults younger than 21 violates the Second Amendment," the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit ruled today. "The law is unconstitutional in light of our nation's historic tradition of firearm regulation," a three-judge panel unanimously concluded in Reese v. ATF, end quote. It truly is a big ruling from the panel, but part of it, the portion about our nation's historic tradition of firearm regulation, requires more attention that we will devote in a moment. Sullum notes, quote, "Today's ruling is yet another critical FPC win against an immoral and unconstitutional age-based gun ban," said Brandon Combs, president of the Firearms Policy Coalition, FPC, which challenged the law along with two would-be handgun buyers and two other gun rights groups. "We look forward to restoring the Second Amendment's rights of peaceable adults throughout the United States," end quote. Many Americans might wonder how the U.S. government can tell teenagers that they have to register for a military draft, while at the same time the government tells them that if they're under 21, they can't personally own a firearm without breaking the vaunted U.S. so-called law. But that observation, as salient as that might be, doesn't address the breach of principle. The so-called law is a statute, not natural law. It's invented by politicians, not given by God to each of us. Sullum adds key points about the current case and about the underlying attack on rights that has threatened generations of Americans. Quote, "Under 18 U.S. Code 922b1, a provision that was included in the Gun Control Act of 1968, a federally licensed firearm dealer may not sell handguns to any individual whom the licensee knows or has reasonable cause to believe is less than 21 years of age." The Fifth Circuit upheld that restriction in 2012, but that was a decade before the Supreme Court clarified the constitutional test for gun control laws in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruen. End quote. Which brings us to the larger lesson in the panel ruling, the reference to the Bruen decision. Released in June of 2022, the Supreme Court majority decision in Bruen was a double-edged sword. Although it shot down a New York State statute that claimed there was no individual right to keep and bear arms in public, it established a two-tier standard, as they call it, for analyzing whether a statute that infringes on the right to keep and bear arms actually does infringe on the right. Now see if you can figure this out. As I noted last year for MRC-TV, quote, "The first level of the Bruen standard is simple. In it, the SCOTUS hewed to the actual wording of the Second Amendment, which asks essentially, does a challenged statute adhere to the wording of the Second Amendment? Well, if it infringes the right to keep and bear arms, it doesn't adhere. Simple. But then the 2022 Supreme Court Bruen majority offered its second tier of adjudication, which undercuts the first. Indeed, don't bother with their first level and the actual words of the Second Amendment. The 2022 SCOTUS majority claimed that if a government could show an historical example of an infringement from the early days of the U.S., then that might lead to the contemporary statute being judged as perfectly fine. In other words, their invention of the second level negates the Second Amendment, end quote. Yeah, this is a major problem. It's an offense predicated on the very idea that a judge, be he or she on the Supreme Court bench or working in a lower court, can excuse a contemporary breach of the Second Amendment by citing some historical breach of the Second Amendment, the clear wording of which is a universal proscription forbidding any infringement of the right to keep and bear arms. Thus, once more, we encounter a judicial decision that at first appears to be laudable, but of course isn't. What supporter of the right to keep and bear arms could find fault with a decision that dismantles a federal proscription of that right for people aged 18 through 21? But the underlying flaw seen here and in the Bruen second tier standard must be called out. To round out our coverage, let's note that Sullum offers more of the good news from the ruling, reporting that Fifth Circuit Judge Edith Jones wrote in part, quote, "There are no age or maturity restrictions in the plain text of the amendment, as there are in other constitutional provisions, which suggests that the Second Amendment lacks a minimum age requirement." She also observes that the right of the people peaceably to assemble, protected by the First Amendment, the right of the people to be secure from unreasonable searches and seizures, protected by the Fourth Amendment, and the unspecified rights retained by the people under the Ninth Amendment undoubtedly protect 18 to 20-year-olds as much as 21-year-olds, end quote. Indeed, as the judge notes in her opinion, and we can see in the history of the early United States, the militia contained many males under 21. And as I've noted for MRC-TV when covering a federal district court ruling on this question, American Revolutionary hero Nathan Hale had only just turned 21 when the British hanged him in September of 1776. It would be nice if politicians and even judges who purportedly back the right to keep and bear arms would face the reality that rights are not supposed to be touched by government, and that little carve-outs are unacceptable, they're immoral, and they're dangerous, and that agents of the government already take our money in order to engage in their infuriating attempts to massage and manage rights that are supposed to be off-limits from their acquisitive hands. This panel decision is mostly positive, but on principle, the inclusion of a reference to the Bruen second tier tells us that the court is not ready to fully stop the state from infringing on our rights. That's a big lesson to take from a generally pro-rights circuit court ruling. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please like and subscribe, and of course, find us all the time at MRCTV.org. That's MRCTV.org. While you're there, please check out the store and please consider donating to the Media Research Center. Find us all the time inside Facebook as well, and check us out on Instagram, TikTok, and on YouTube, where, yes, they sometimes censor us, and all the time on Rumble, where they don't censor us. Please share the videos far and wide. You can also find us on X. And if you want to find me on Gab, I'm at Gardner Goldsmith on Gab. And on X, you can find me as at Gard Goldsmith. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please share the videos. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.